here's what's coming up on your horizon. Well, very few people in the United States have ever traveled to Cuba. Some very rigid travel restrictions enacted by our own government close to a half-century ago has made sure of that. So when I had a chance to travel with some legislative leaders trying to open up the Cuban market to Oklahoma exports, I jumped at the chance. Today, we start off with the beginning of the end of a trade policy a growing number of people in both countries see as a Cold War relic.
These people have to eat, and we have good products. And the thing that I like about the location is where we are, especially in Oklahoma.
I go in depth on everything from the price of oil to the changing dynamic of our economy with author, CNN host, and public policy expert Fareed Zakaria.
Well, you're right to highlight it. That is the single most important trend, economic trend, but even political trend that's coursing through the world right now.
We'll introduce you to an Oklahoma craftsman who is rocking with the Royals.
When I was pregnant with our first baby, I ran into an article in a magazine that showed how to make a rocking horse.
And we end our day with some very special young people and the animals they love. Stay with us for Oklahoma Horizon.
Oklahoma Horizon is made possible by the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology Education.
Oklahoma's investment in career tech provides more than nationally recognized technology education and training. It produces solid financial returns for the state's economic future. Oklahoma Career Tech, elevating our economy.
And the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping good people grow good things. And now, from the Career Tech Studios in Stillwater, here's your host, Rob McClendon.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Horizon. Well, late last year, President Obama announced that the United States is changing its policy towards Cuba. What started out as a proposed prisoner swap turned into a historic shift in relations, ending what had been nearly a 5-decade-old embargo on travel and trade. Yet much of the work to open the Cuban market was already underway in states like Oklahoma. Today, we examine what the opening of the Cuban market could mean for the state, but we begin with a little history. The streets of Havana are filled these days with tourists from all around the world. But among the revelers, a trade delegation from Oklahoma wanting to export food to this island nation just off the Florida coast.
These people have to eat, and we have good products. And the thing that I like about the location is where we are, especially in Oklahoma. We could get our product to the port very easily. We take it to the port anyway and get it here very quickly. Less freight. I mean, freight's a big cost for a lot of ag producers right now.
And that they have done. In the fall of 2004, the first ship in over 40 years arrived in Cuba filled full of Oklahoma wheat. A shipment Oklahoma farmers had hoped would be the first of many more to come. But that hasn't happened.
Our government changed the rules a little bit and made them prepay for the wheat that we bought. When that happened, it really made it a lot more difficult.
Federal obstacles that dried up future sales. Unlike other countries we export to, Cuba must pay in cash before delivery on ships that can't return to the U.S. for a full year, a hurdle that angers Cuban officials and frustrates state leaders.
Well, there is a little bit of frustration that we're not as far as what we would have liked to have been from where we were 6 or 7 years ago. From a geographical location, from a logistical standpoint, this ought to be our market, and we hopefully someday will get to that point. And yes, it has been frustrating, but we are making progress.
Progress Oklahoma's former ag secretary believes gives the state an advantage.
We feel like we're building a relationship with the leadership in Cuba, and that we're developing that trust. And I think when the market sure opens and we normalize trade with Cuba, that we'll be a step ahead of everyone, because they're going to say, let's call those Oklahoma people. They took us a chance on us early. Now we know they're our friends.
Work that state lawmakers believe will not be wasted if and when the largest export market in the Caribbean opens to U.S. trade.
The scenario I use, regardless of where you're at, a lot is about relationships. When you develop good relationships with individuals and communication exists, you can tackle any problems that confront you in a much better fashion than you can if you have to sit down and later start to get to know these people and open up those relationships.
I don't feel pressed.
And that day appears to soon be here. After more than 50 years of limited contact with Cuba, both countries are preparing to increase the flow of people and commerce between them. As our Andy Barth reports, it's a move that has Oklahoma's agriculture industry very excited.
National level and state level now. It was a packed room in El Reno, Oklahoma, as U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack answered questions about the future of American agriculture.
We can't always assume that we can grow what we have been traditionally growing. So we have to prepare.
A future that could be brighter with the opening of the Cuban market.
What the President has done through his executive action is reduce some of the friction in terms of how to do business with the Cubans. So we would anticipate and expect it would allow us to get a little bit more of that market share that we've lost over the last several years. We, at one point in time, did about $600 million in business in Cuba. Now we're about $300 million, so we obviously have some upside potential here.
It is a market that we have not been doing anything with.
A potential that the Oklahoma Wheat Commission's Mike Schulte says will benefit the wheat industry.
Oklahoma wheat producers and U.S. wheat producers are extremely excited about this announcement. Oklahoma in particular has realized the importance of the Cuba market for wheat exports for a long time, and we're hoping that we can take some opportunities in the future.
And Oklahoma Farm Bureau's John Collison says seeing Cuba firsthand showed him how desperate the country is for U.S. agricultural goods.
I've been on the ground in Cuba. I spent a week there. I met with their trade ministers. We met with agriculture. It makes sense. You know, people are hungry. People want to eat. It's a close trade proximity to us. Open the markets.
And Schulte says Cuban officials already know and like Oklahoma's top commodity.
They've told us in the past that they want our wheat. They were extremely happy when we had shipments come from Texas and Oklahoma.
And for Vilsack, he sees a big future with Cuba relations.
If and when the embargo gets lifted overall and business is more effectively done with the Cubans, I think we're going to see a much larger share of that $1.7 billion market coming to U.S. agriculture, because we have got the goods, we've got affordable price, we're only 90 miles away from that island, so there's tremendous opportunity here.
Food policy has never been something we should use as a tool. Let's open the markets, let's get out there, and let's trade with the world.
Now, some of the changes the president hopes to make, including an end to the embargo, will require congressional approval, and some U.S. lawmakers aren't convinced our country should mend ties with Cuba. Well, if you'd like to learn more about the on-again, off-again relations Oklahoma has had with Cuba, I do have my entire series of stories from the past decade streaming on our website, and I think they'll give you a good insight into just how much politics can influence policy. Now, to see any of those segments, just head to okhorizon.com and look under this week's Value Added. Now, when we return, my conversation with one of the country's foremost minds on our changing economy.
You're watching Oklahoma Horizon, featuring some of the good things that are happening in the great state of Oklahoma.
Well, when it comes to public policy and global relations, few people have the respect my next guest does. Fareed Zakaria is an Indian-born American journalist and author who believes his adopted country's success will hinge on our ability to adapt to new changing dynamics in the global economy. I was able to sit down with Zakaria shortly before he spoke to the Tulsa Town Hall. Well, Mr. Zakaria, with the price of oil roughly half of what it was just this past summer, we've been reminded here in the middle of energy country just how much a part we are of the global economy. Any thoughts there from you?
Well, you're right to highlight it. That is the single most important trend, economic trend, but even political trend that's coursing through the world right now. The fact that oil has gone down so fast and so far. I suspect the price of oil is going to stay in this range. It's probably overshot on the downside just as it overshot on the upside. But it's likely to stay in this range, and I'll tell you why. There are two factors that are at play here. The first, and probably the most important, was the decline in demand, particularly from China. China had been the great sucking sound that was taking in all the oil, all the marginal oil. For the last 10 years, China had grown its oil demand 7% year after year. In 2014, the growth in Chinese demand in oil was 0. So that's the big shift that took place. And the other one, of course, we all know is the rise of American production, but production also around the world. Those two forces are still in play. China's demand has weakened. America will continue to pump oil. So I suspect that we're in a world, a new normal, where oil will be in the perhaps $60 range. And this is going to put enormous pressure on all the oil-producing countries in the world that have large populations. Qatar and the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait will be fine because they don't have any people. But when you're like Russia, you have 140 million people and you have subsidies and you have government expenditures. That's a hell of a challenge. For America, it's basically positive. For most Americans, it means a huge tax cut. A cut in the price of oil is a tax cut. Obviously, for producers in America, that puts a lot of pressure. But American producers are the most efficient producers in the world. And so I suspect that you will find American producers find ways to cut costs, find efficiency, and of course, some wells will close down.
Mm-hmm. Now, getting into the conspiracy theories, the geopolitics of it all, this hurts Russia. This also hurts Iran. Saudi Arabia is not particularly fond of Iran, and right now we have been at odds with Russia a bit. Have you heard any of that talk in a wider sense?
Oh yeah, of course, and especially in the Middle East, people think that this is a U.S.-Saudi kind of deal, conspiracy. Highly unlikely. First of all, this hurts the Saudis. Don't make any mistake of it. The Saudis can't afford to bear the pain, but there's real pain here. Saudi Arabia needs oil at about $85 a barrel to be able to balance its books, to not run a deficit. Right now, they are having to draw down tens of billions of dollars from their foreign exchange reserves. They'll probably have to spend $100 billion this year out of their foreign exchange reserves to simply fulfill the commitments they've made. So this is tough on them. Secondly, I think that whole way of thinking about oil prices is a relic of the past. Here's the most interesting fact about the last year or two. In 2014, for the first time since the first oil shocks of the early 70s, non-OPEC oil production was larger than OPEC oil production. In other words, there is no cartel that can set prices anymore. There's just a lot of supply out there and a lot of demand, and the price, like the price for almost everything, is now increasingly set by those raw market forces, not by a bunch of sheikhs sitting in Abu Dhabi or Dubai.
Without the energy boost that we have become used to here in Oklahoma, many believe our economy could look more like the national economy this coming year. What do you think the national economy is going to be like this coming year?
I think the American economy is going to pick up substantially. I think the country is going to grow over 3%. I think we will be the fastest growing large developed economy in the world by far. That is to say, if you compare the United States to Japan or Europe. The United States looks probably the safest rich country in the world, the most prosperous rich country, and the most dynamic. But of course, you're right. There are the oil-producing states, Oklahoma, Texas, North Dakota, now with natural gas, are going to feel some of the pressure. 9% of the American economy is tied to oil. That compares with, I think, 70% of the Saudi economy. So we're in a very different situation. It's a diverse economy, and there will be substitution. But remember, this is good. Pressure is what causes countries, companies, people to reform, to adapt, to change. So Oklahoma has made some very important investments that will actually bear fruit. All that will begin to matter, and there are many areas where things will still continue to do very well, agriculture and things like that. So I don't expect that there will be a kind of crash in Oklahoma, but yeah, it will be the boom times, as you well know, can never last forever.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a skills-based culture. In terms of workforce, how is our economy changing?
The fundamental change that is taking place is we are moving increasingly and rapidly to an economy in which people who can manipulate symbols and knowledge, by which I mean numbers, words, concepts, are going to do well. And people who use their hands to make things are going to find it more challenging, because those tasks that used to be done by human muscle power are now being done by machines or by Chinese and Indians. So either you can find somebody who can do it much cheaper than you can halfway around the world, or you find a machine to do it. So the entire focus of our country should be, and our economy should be, how do you get knowledge workers? One of the great tragedies I find is that at this moment, the federal commitment to basic research, basic investment has declined. We're at the lowest levels of federal funding for science in 40 years, at the very moment when we are trying to create a knowledge-based economy. It should be the opposite. We should be spending 2 to 3 times as much as we're spending on basic research, basic development, because those are going to be the industries of the future. We're not going to have a huge steel industry in the future. Those kind of jobs are just going to places like China and South Korea. But we could have advanced manufacturing. We could have software design. We could have all those things that require knowledge power.
Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about an economy that's full of PhDs, but an economy where the workers are certified and skilled.
If you look at the manufacturing we get, there are jobs there. There are fewer jobs, but they're higher paying. But those people, that's right, they need real skills. But those skills are about, as I say, the manipulating of symbols, numbers, words. So it's software programmers. It's people who know how to operate complicated computers and machines, which inevitably now means they have to understand some software. If you look at the whole world of entertainment, which is a huge industry, the big jobs are in design, in program management. So none of these jobs are PhDs. These jobs are often, you could do it with a bachelor's degree. But you do need to focus in on the kind of skills that are going to be important. The sweet spot is actually to have a strong understanding of computers and software with some kind of creative sensibility. So if you are the English major who understands computers, you could work on the next Frozen, right? And those are big industries. We forget about them sometimes.
You have been quoted as saying we are in a new age of thinking. Where do you see that we may be stuck right now in the old age?
Perhaps the most important way in the United States is it's what happens to people, it's what happens to companies, and it's what can happen to a country. Your success blinds you to the new world. We're doing fine. America is doing very well. It's a powerful, dynamic economy. But we're not, as a result, we're not looking around and asking ourselves, what could we do better? How's the world changing? And the world is changing very profoundly. One decade ago, 10 years ago, China made up about 1% of the global economy. Today it makes up 10% of the global economy. The so-called emerging markets, China, India, Brazil, made up 20% of the global economy. Today they make up 45% of the global economy. Within 5 years they'll be half the global economy. Will be all these third world countries that nobody ever paid any attention to. So when you start to see those kind of changes, if you look and ask yourself, where's the tallest building in the world? It is now in Dubai. Where is the biggest bridge in the world? It is in China. Where's the largest oil refinery in the world? It's in India. That's the new world. And to ask ourselves how we can take the greatest opportunities there, we have to recognize that we tend to be parochial. We tend to be somewhat comfortable with the world we know. And understandably, it's worked very well for us. But it may not work that well for our children.
Fareed Zakaria, thank you for your insights. Now I was able to speak to Zakaria as part of the Tulsa Town Hall's lecture series. And their next speaker is James Bradley on February the 27th. Now he's the author of the best-selling book that was made into the acclaimed movie Flags of Our Fathers, the true life story of the Marines and corpsmen who raised the flag on Iwo Jima.
Still to come on Oklahoma Horizon, giving students with special needs a day in the show ring. But first, a princely present.
Well, an Oklahoman has been keeping a presidential secret. As Andrea Morgan tells us, the first family, with help from a local craftsman, is rocking Buckingham Palace.
Childhood toys may have evolved over the years, yet, as one Oklahoman shows us, the old-fashioned rocking horse is still a coveted toy, even for royalty. With a chip here and a sand there, Jackie Wilson has been making rocking horses for nearly 30 years.
When I was pregnant with our first baby, I ran into an article in a magazine that showed how to make a rocking horse. And I was so excited because I got to make a horse for this baby.
What began as a hobby progressed into a business that caught the attention of some very important people.
I got a call from the State Department. It's like they were looking at the website. The lady was from the Office of Protocol. One of their responsibilities was to buy gifts for dignitaries. And she couldn't tell me who it was for, but we talked back and forth, emailed, and eventually I actually could tell, kind of guessed from some of her clues that this was for the little prince.
A gift that started as a piece of wood. Wilson chisels for detail, smooths edges, and paints the horse to life.
And it was a year later, this last summer in 2014, when I discovered, it came out in the news publicly, that Obama had given a horse to the little, Prince George, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge.
And for little Prince George, his horse was delivered and put on display at Buckingham Palace, an exhibit Wilson saw firsthand.
It was beautiful. In the atmosphere, Buckingham Palace has, there's something really special over there that we miss here. They have such an honor for their royalty. And I appreciated that atmosphere that they carry, the respect and honor for their queen.
Back here at home, Wilson continues to make rocking horses for people and kids to enjoy.
When I was in the store and the kids would come into the store, the gleam they'd get in their eye, they'd run to the horses, they want to ride the horses, and it's just seeing the pleasure on the kids riding the horses is where I get my pleasure.
Now, when Wilson was at the exhibit in London, a curator told her that her horse was displayed in the exact location of where Queen Elizabeth dubs knights.
Now, while fit for royalty, not all of Wilson's rocking horses have a princely price. If you'd like to take a look, we have a link to her website under this story at okhorizon.com. Want to share something you've seen here today? Well, all of our episodes are streaming on our YouTube channel at Oklahoma Horizon TV. Or you can subscribe to our weekly free podcasts on iTunes. Well, the livestock show industry is big business in Oklahoma, but for one annual show in Stillwater, their focus is on students with special needs. Joining me now is our Courtney May.
The Heart of a Champion Livestock Show gives students with special needs a hands-on opportunity to learn about agriculture. The students show sheep, pigs, and goats with help from experienced showmen. A learning experience you can't find in a classroom.
I've done this since I was about 4 years old, and you're doing twice as good a job as I ever did.
It's show day in Stillwater, Oklahoma. And for students like Jessica, it's time to show their talents.
He's soft. You think he's soft? There he goes.
Come on, Jesse, let's go catch up with him.
And with help from members of the Alpha Gamma Rho fraternity, local students with special needs are given the opportunity to shine.
We invite the kids from Stillwater Public Schools, the special needs kids, to come out here and show these animals. Gives them an opportunity to have a hands-on experience that a lot of us grew up with, but a lot of times these kids never had the opportunity to. But it also allows us to promote agriculture.
Give me a high five for that one.
Students are able to show pigs, sheep, and goats provided by Stillwater FFA. And with a goal other than winning in mind, special needs instructor Beth Helm is confident they have achieved it.
It brings out a lot in these kids, a lot of kids that are nonverbal, a lot of kids that have problems sitting down and stuff. Animals have a really interesting effect on students with disabilities, and we've seen that more and more.
Much like the relationship Jessica has with the pig she named Pritz. Driving Pritz around the ring while giving him a pep talk. A people-animal bond that has an everlasting effect.
A lot of them will come out of their shell, they'll even try to talk a little bit, they'll show a little more emotion towards animals. They just make them feel really comfortable.
And Helm says many of her students leave the livestock show wanting to join an agriculture education class, a field trip that could introduce some students to their future, while rewarding to the members of Alpha Gamma Rho.
It builds a lot of professionalism and things that these guys are going to take away and use whenever we get out of school in the real world.
An opportunity that makes everyone a winner.
None of this would have been possible without the help of the local Stillwater FFA chapter, who provided the animals for the students to show. And Rob, after the show, each of the participants were awarded a Super Showman ribbon to ensure that everyone went home a winner.
Well, certainly a great program and a nice story. Thank you, Courtney.
You're welcome, Rob.
Next time on Oklahoma Horizon, from cradle to career, we examine the economics of early childhood education.
We are paying more for special education and more for infant health costs than we need to. So it's absolutely about economics, and it's particularly about reducing spending burdens on taxpayers.
Plus, we look at the personal toll of texting while driving. On Oklahoma Show over the Heartland, Oklahoma Horizon. Well, thanks for including us as part of your day. I'm Rob McClendon. Hope to see you back here next week.